The minds of some convicts aren't always settled when it comes time for sentencing, so you never know what sort of reaction you might expect. Then again, some are entirely settled and their reactions are equally as stunning because of the opposite reason.
Oh, you didn't see me dancing? I was the one
You were
dancing.
dancing, I was sitting upstairs in the shade.
Shock value. Whether it's a teen smiling and relishing in his crimes or someone trying to escape at the last minute despite overwhelming odds, here are 15 of the craziest reactions of convicts after being given a life sentence.
His smiling was in no way meant as disrespectful either to the family, to the victim, or to this court.
Number 15. Diana Lovejoy. A woman convicted in a murder-for-hire plot against her ex-husband seemed so shocked to be found guilty, so much so that she fainted in court just moments after her verdict was read. Diana Lovejoy, 45, was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder over an attack on her estranged husband in California. A stunned legal team member reached out to save her from falling, grabbed her elbow as a nearby officer jumped in to help. The officer assisted her in lying down as a fellow officer radioed for additional assistance. The judge cleared the courtroom while she received medical attention. Paramedics eventually wheeled her out of the courthouse and to the hospital for treatment. The dramatics briefly delayed the verdict reading for Lovejoy's co-defendant. He was later found guilty of attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. The woman and victim had separated earlier that year and were in the middle of an ugly custody battle. The legal fight was ending after shared custody had been agreed upon. Lovejoy had also agreed to pay her ex $120,000, which could have been due just weeks after the attempted murder incident occurred. You want to know a little secret? If you smash the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell, you'll have superpowers for the rest of your life. So what are you waiting for? Time to fly. Number 14. A judge gets judged. When people use their positions of power to help their family members out of binds, it typically doesn't end well once it falls into the public eye. Ex-County Juvenile Court Judge Tracy Hunter was slapped with 6 months in prison for giving her younger brother, working as a corrections officer, confidential documents in a plot to save his job. Evidence was dug up, and she was eventually convicted of unlawful interest in a public contract and was sent to jail after a series of appeals had failed. The ex-judge willfully collapsed after standing up to be escorted to jail. Officers literally dragged her out of the courtroom. Protesters shouted "No justice, no peace" when her sentence was announced, and she pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Still, she was convicted of one felony count of unlawful interest in a public contract, with the jury failing to reach a verdict on all other counts. Number 13. Russian suspect breaks free. Some people will do anything for one last breath of freedom. This Russian man in court for murder tried to escape through the ceiling while the case was in the middle of a session. Perhaps he thought everyone was so stuck on the details of the case that they'd forgotten about him entirely. That's until he remembered the whole case was about him and all eyes were on him all the time. He does get further along in his plan than one might suspect, but not long enough to evade the numerous officers ready to pull him back down. I guess that's what happens when you're an 18-year-old and still think you're invincible to danger and that the consequences of the world don't apply to you. The guards are literally standing right outside his glass box as he makes the attempt. He doesn't seem to mind and is determined to make his way through that ceiling. The guards look a little perturbed that he's even trying. He gets pretty far up there before they start to make a big deal about his legit escape attempt at one point. Still, he can't escape the clutches of 3 Russian guards. Unfortunately for the team, he ends up stuck in the vent he escaped from with his literal pants around his ankles, dangling helplessly. Now he's asking for help from his predicament. Number 12. Silence in the court. A robber made national headlines when a Cuyahoga County judge ordered his mouth taped during a court proceeding. The judge handed out a whopping 33-year sentence after remarking that the convict did not learn from his 4 previous prison stints of escalating crimes over a decade. The crimes go up and the pattern continues, so the judge decided to end the spree there. The judge called him a narcissistic individual who blamed everyone else for his problems. His decade-long criminal history of victimizing the county had come to an end, read headlines quoted from the judge herself. A few years back, the convict was convicted guilty of multiple felony charges, including armed robbery and multiple crimes from a high-speed chase that ensued after. The convict portrayed himself as a social justice icon who wished to be the voice of so many unheard. After the proceedings, he commented on his treatment and said that he felt like a dog about to be put to rest. No matter the person or the crime, humane treatment should be a priority. Number 11. Crying carjacker. Ryan Stone carjacked numerous people during his Denver area crime spree. He was sentenced for attempted manslaughter and dozens of other charges. He won't be eligible for parole for another approximately 75 years. A trooper with the Colorado State Patrol ended up with severe injuries, including several broken bones, severe gashes, and head trauma. It all went down after the convict's vehicle clipped the officers as he was trying to place stop sticks on E470 to end the chase. The chase started when Stone stole a car with someone still in the back seat. The pursuit crossed over 5 different counties and stretched a whopping 75 miles. It went on for 1.5 hours during morning rush hour and included speeds exceeding 100 miles an hour. In his escape, the convict brutally carjacked several drivers along the way. Then, despite all the people he'd hurt in his escape, he started crying in the courtroom after hearing his sentencing. A few moments earlier, he was heard boasting to a female he'd called about the new attention his escapades had garnered. Number 10. Sassy teen. When you get minor sentencing or fee, as this woman did, it's best to just take what you get and roll with the punches. You can get up from a few hits. After exclaiming that she has jewelry like Rick Ross ready to sell when she gets out, the judge ups her fee from $5,000 to $10,000. Infuriated by this move, the woman in jail gets a little sassy with her language as she marches off camera. The judge isn't too happy with this response either, so he calls her back once more in front of the camera. He asks her whether she said what he thinks she said, and not denying that fact, gets sentenced to 30 days for contempt. All of this was when she was supposed to be released from jail. Imagine the day of freedom ending in another 30 days of prison time for something like this. Looks like the pawning of that Rick Ross jewelry will have to wait. Number 9. Basketball star collapses. Sometimes people need a bump back to reality when they've been standing out from the crowd for so long. Elevated to a status of belief they can do whatever they want, they often crash and crash hard. This reality smack can be hard on some, especially the still unrefined mind of teenagers. For example, 18-year-old Tony Farmer, once a basketball standout, can be seen fainting after receiving a 3-year prison sentence after confessing to multiple heinous crimes. His once shining basketball career was stuffed in a can, waiting to either be opened back up to the world or to sit at the bottom of the pantry collecting dust and the crumbs for food items stacked atop it. He was once ranked among the top 100 prospects. He was primed and ready to head to esteemed universities, including Ohio State, Xavier, Michigan State, Illinois, or Iowa. The world was his oyster until he decided to deny himself its riches and close the shell on himself. The stiff penalty was to address a hefty crime, and he paid for it with what could have been the best thing in his life: basketball. Number 8. Ebola scare. If you want to make a scene, screaming out you have a deadly virus amidst a court hearing is one way to do it. When it was Joseph Britton's turn to appear during his morning bond hearing, he started by telling the officer, "I'd back up, and I'd back up pretty quick if I were you." He then went on to tell him he had Ebola. Taking this information to the judge, the officer whispered the news. The judge cleared the courtroom of everyone but Britton. There, more in-depth questioning of his condition took place. Britton quickly backstepped after realizing the severity of his claim, saying the officer got the context wrong. He backpedaled, claiming it was a nurse that had Ebola that was in Fort Lauderdale and took care of Britton earlier. The Fort Lauderdale reference pertained to the Ebola diagnosis of a nurse in Dallas back in 2014. The nurse had flown on Frontier Airlines from Ohio to Dallas on Monday, one day before being hospitalized with symptoms of the disease. Britton was confirmed not to have any claim, as was indeed a stalling tactic. Number 7. Table flip. It shows that some convicts go the extra mile to play the role of victim in their own case. As this convict rolled into the courthouse in a wheelchair, he drew a few empathetic eyes. That was all shredded when he was found guilty, and the wheelchair-bound convict didn't seem too helpless after all. Frustrated with how things were unfolding in his case, The man facing multiple felony charges rose from his wheelchair in rage. He flipped the heavy table in front of him with ease, sending legal papers floating about the courtroom. Deputies promptly subdued him back to his wheelchair and ushered him out of the courtroom as he yelled profanities. The bulk of the charges came from a string of thefts and vehicle break-ins. He rose from his wheelchair and flipped the table after being told he would not receive additional time to prepare for his January 23rd jury trial, for which he elected to represent himself in defense. If you can't control your anger at even the setting stages of the case, how in the world did this guy expect to represent himself in the important parts? Flipping a heavy table while you defend yourself from an assault charge would be a difficult sell at this point. Number 6. Tragic fire. A 17-year-old pleaded guilty to setting ablaze a fatal fire that left their family stuck with grief and confusion. The teen awaited trial until he turned 18. He was tried and found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and third-degree arson. He's facing 15 years, 5 for manslaughter and 10 for unlawful conduct. On the arson charge, he pleaded guilty under a stipulation called the Alford plea, which means he accepted punishment but did not admit guilt to setting the fire. The family isn't convinced he committed the crimes and claims the charges against their son are yet another tragedy to befall an already tragedy-stricken group of people. Investigators determined the fire had 2 points of origin, in the living room and the bedroom. The 2 rooms were notably on nearly opposite sides of the home, making it difficult to believe it occurred unintentionally. The teen initially claimed he believed space heaters to be at fault, but further more information during a personal police interview days later. Number 5. Real-life Joker. If there is one comic book criminal you shouldn't want in existence, it's the Joker. His pure joy for violence and chaos is enough to throw entire cities into disarray. It's clear no one can ever match the craziness of the comic book character. He's a supervillain after all, but there are sure to be plenty of copycats out there trying to copy his style. Take Lawrence Patrick Sullivan, a 29-year-old who dyes his hair green and tattooed a smile on his face. He was arrested for rolling around the streets, pointing a loaded gun at people, but never firing an actual bullet. This blatant attempt at villainous stardom sure does sound like something a comic villain would attempt. The words "ha ha ha" are tattooed on his face, and even one with the bat symbol pierced by a sword. Does this guy think Batman is real too? Or perhaps he thinks some rich billionaire vigilante will emerge and snuff out his crime spree of pointing loaded weapons at people? Your guess is as good as ours, but it's clear some people are taking this comic book craze a little too seriously. Number 4. Vacation buddies. This judge must have a knack for recognizing faces because this isn't the first time she's been in the headlines for recognizing people in her courtroom. Earlier, she recognized a middle school friend. This time around, a co-vacationer who'd taken the same cruise line and formed a short friendship with the judge. In an extradition hearing, the man appeared in court when the judge said, "Have a nice cruise?" The stunned defendant quickly remembered the judge and was stunned at the revelation. The man then asked the judge whether she had witnessed his poolside dance for the competition, to which the judge replied she had. They both laughed at this strange turn of events, and the court proceeding went on without a hiccup. Unfortunately, the judge was forced to convict her new friend with a whopping sentence. You can't mix business and personal relationships, especially when it comes to something as sensitive to interpretation as justice and law. Number 3. Convict insults judge. When a convict commits murder just to get out of a $160 theft, you know there are clearly some ethical issues going on up there. The fact this person thought someone's life was worth their $160 is ludicrous. This wasn't some back alley robbery, but a poker game turned sour. His attorney begged him not to read the letter before the court, but the teen had other plans and proceeded regardless. His words insulted the judge and were aimed at the prosecutors. It was intended to bring attention to a change in wording that the convict claims allowed his guilty conviction to proceed. The prosecutors returned the remarks by saying the overwhelming amount of evidence at the scene did that alone. No change of wording. He committed the murder, and that's why he was found guilty of it. They were later quoted. After the teen's comment, the judge fired back, saying she's rarely ever seen a monster walk into her courtroom, and when she did, she knew this was one of them. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. Sentenced with a smile. Some cases are shrouded in mystery and circumstances, while others are clear as day. The worst case is typically something like this, with the guilty smiling with no remorse for what they'd done whatsoever. Despite the pain that person may have caused, it means little to them when a smile cracks across their stern face with such ease. The judge took notice of this reaction and berated the convict of their crude behavior too, which he almost broke out laughing. Instead, the shocking scene was met with anger, sadness, and rage. This murderer decided it was a great idea to smile during the time the victim's family members read their impact statements before the jury. After the family had finished, the defendant at the time addressed the court, to which she replied with an appalling statement saying, "I just want to tell y'all I'll be home soon. I love my family." She walked off the stage to stare the many in disbelief. The judge, seeing this behavior, turned to the prosecutors and asked whether the sentencing was too lenient. The judge scolded the convict by saying, "Watching you sit there, smile, laugh, shake your head like this was no big deal, I'm very tempted to just say, I'm not going to accept this sentencing agreement and we'll go to trial. If you're convicted of felony murder, you'll go to prison for the rest of your life. That means you'll die there. That's what I'm tempted to do." The convict's behaviors obviously didn't sit well with the judge with a response like that, nor should it have. Number 1. Balcony escape. Some people would do anything to escape prison time, including jumping from the second-story balcony during a courthouse hearing. According to the sheriff's office, the main question, Rashad Hawkins, appeared in child support court and was sentenced to serve time for failure to pay child support. Deputies said before he could be detained, he fled out the room and apparently escaped by jumping from the second floor. One guard witnessed the whole thing go down, and it was captured on camera. Authorities are still looking for the man. Officials blasted out on social media like Twitter to post the incident, asking residents for information about his whereabouts. When facing the consequences of the law and the justice system, it can be an overwhelming experience, no matter who you are. Some crooks will go to extreme lengths to ensure their defense is as solid as possible. In contrast, others will practically sell themselves out. The courtroom can be an emotional and confusing place for many reasons, and reactions like the ones on today's list are pretty commonplace. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe to get all our lit content delivered right to your inbox.